It's one of the strangest facts in our species' story. Homo sapiens, modern humans, physically and biologically just like us, have been around for at least 200,000 years. If you brought one of them into the present day, gave them a haircut and a decent hoodie, they could walk down the street and no one would look twice. But here's the thing. For most of those 200,000 years, it's like nothing much happened. No cave art, no instruments, no jewelry, no grave goods, no signs of religion, myth, or metaphor. Just people, surviving, using stone tools, hunting, gathering, living. Then, around 50,000 years ago, give or take, a wave of creativity crashes through the archaeological record. Suddenly, humans are painting deep in cave systems. They're making beads and carvings. They're inventing symbolic language, complex hunting strategies, maybe even sailing out to islands with no visible land on the horizon. So what happened? Why the 150,000-year delay? Why did it take so long for humans to start acting, well, human? This mystery, this sudden emergence of what scientists call behavioral modernity, has puzzled researchers for decades. And as it turns out, the answer is much more complicated and far more interesting than anyone thought. The old theory, one mutation to rule them all. For a long time, the leading theory was clean and dramatic. It said that around 50,000 years ago, a genetic mutation suddenly rewired our brains, sparking symbolic thought, culture, and language. The prime suspect? A gene called FOXP2. This gene, discovered in the 1990s, was linked to speech and language disorders in families with rare mutations. When scientists found that FOXP2 helps regulate dozens of other genes involved in brain development, the hype began. Maybe this was the long-sought language gene. Maybe FOXP2 was the trigger for everything that makes us us. But in 2007, this theory took a major hit. A team of researchers, including Svante Pääbo, sequenced the FOXP2 gene in Neanderthals and discovered they had the exact same version as modern humans. That was a problem. If Neanderthals had this same gene, then it wasn't unique to Homo sapiens. FOXP2 might still be important for speech, but it couldn't explain the sudden burst of culture that showed up 50,000 years ago. So the idea of a single mutation sparking modern humanity? That theory didn't age well. Rewriting the timeline. At the same time geneticists were questioning the FOXP2 idea, archaeologists were finding evidence that pushed behavioral modernity much farther back than anyone had thought. In Blombos Cave, on the southern coast of South Africa, excavations revealed engraved pieces of red ochre, some with intricate cross-hatch patterns. These date back to around 100,000 years ago. Nearby, researchers found shell beads with holes drilled into them, likely used as personal ornaments or status symbols. That's not survival behavior. That's symbolic behavior. Even more impressive, at Pinnacle Point, another coastal site nearby, archaeologists found evidence that humans were using fire to process stone tools and harvesting shellfish, both signs of advanced planning and environmental knowledge. And the dates? Some layers go back 164,000 years. That's 3 times older than the supposed 50,000-year revolution. More discoveries followed. Deep Kloof rock shelter showed signs of painted ostrich eggshells used as water containers. Sibudu Cave revealed early bedding, composite tools made with glue, and clear use of ochre. These were people thinking ahead, decorating, making things with meaning, using the environment with precision. The picture that emerged was clear. Behavioral modernity didn't arrive in a single leap. It was building up slowly, over tens of thousands of years. The 50,000-year explosion wasn't a beginning, it was a tipping point. Why did we miss the signs? So why did the old theory stick around for so long? Well, for one thing, Europe. A huge chunk of archaeological work in the 19th and 20th centuries happened in Europe, and modern humans didn't reach Europe until, surprise, about 50,000 years ago. It's not like archaeology was born in 19th century Europe. But it really took off at that point, so it's only natural they started looking in their close vicinity. Like most fields, it's biased. Like medicine, psychology, and so on. So the first signs of modern behavior we found, cave paintings in France and Spain, figurines from Germany, were dated to that moment. But that was a local event. It wasn't when modernity began. It was when it arrived in Europe. In a way, it's like assuming a band's first hit single is the first time they ever picked up a guitar. In reality, they'd been playing garages, bars, and empty basements for years. We just weren't looking. The other humans. We like to imagine we had that main character energy all along, that we were the chosen ones, the thinkers, the artists, the only species that could stand in front of a fire, look into the flames, and start asking why. But we weren't alone. For most of our history, Homo sapiens shared the world with other humans, different species, with their own tools, their own lives, their own stories. And the more we learn about them, the more it challenges that old myth that we were the only ones with a mind for meaning. Let's start with the best known of the bunch, Neanderthals. They first emerged around 400,000 years ago, spreading through Europe and parts of Western Asia. For a long time, they were painted as brutish, hunched cave dwellers, primitive compared to us. That stereotype stuck for over a century. But now, that image has been thoroughly debunked. Neanderthals made sophisticated Mousterian tools, tailored to different uses and environments. They used fire, likely knew how to control it, and there's evidence they used manganese dioxide, a black powder, to help ignite wood. That's not just survival, that's chemistry. They also buried their dead. At sites like Shanidar Cave in Iraq, dating back at least 65,000 years, archaeologists found Neanderthal skeletons positioned in burial pits, sometimes accompanied by what may have been flowers or pollen. Was this ritual? Mourning? We can't know for sure, but it points to symbolic thought, or at the very least, emotion. Neanderthals also painted. At least one cave in Spain, La Pasiega, contains red pigment markings that have been dated to over 64,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens ever set foot in Europe. And then there's Bruniquel Cave, France. In 2016, researchers dated the construction of ring-shaped structures, made from hundreds of snapped-off stalagmites, at nearly 176,000 years old, built by Neanderthals. In the pitch dark, over 300 meters from the cave entrance. That's not instinct. That's planning. Deliberate, intentional, possibly even symbolic. And it wasn't just Neanderthals. Further east in the mountains of Siberia, we met another mysterious cousin, the Denisovans. They were first identified in 2010 when a tiny fragment of pinky bone from a young girl was recovered from Denisova Cave in Russia's Altai Mountains. What made her remarkable? Her DNA didn't match Neanderthals or modern humans. She was something else, a new branch on the family tree. Since then, we've learned that Denisovans interbred with both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals. Their genetic legacy lives on most strongly in Melanesian and Australian Aboriginal populations, who carry up to 4% Denisovan DNA. And here's the kicker. Denisovans weren't just passive cave dwellers either. In 2019, archaeologists discovered a green chlorodylite bracelet in the same Denisova cave layer, dated to 40,000 years ago or earlier. The bracelet had a bored hole, likely made with some sort of drill-like tool, and was polished to a shine. It may be the oldest piece of fine jewelry ever found, and it wasn't made by us. That's a level of craftsmanship that rivals early Homo sapiens. And then we have the OG of the human saga, Homo erectus. They first appeared nearly 2 million years ago and lasted until at least 100,000 years ago. That's a longer run than any other human species, including us. Respect. Erectus was the first to leave Africa, the first to use fire regularly, and probably the first to cook food. That alone had massive evolutionary effects, Cooked food is easier to digest and more calorie-rich, which likely helped fuel brain development. But they weren't just surviving. In 2014, researchers working in Java found a 500,000-year-old freshwater mussel shell with a zigzag engraving, precise, deliberate, and undeniably symbolic. It's the earliest known example of abstract patterning by a human ancestor. This wasn't a doodle done out of boredom. It took planning, intention, fine motor control. It's a signature, not a physical one, but a cognitive one. Evidence of a mind that could imagine beyond the present moment. We weren't the only thinkers. We weren't the only ones with culture. We weren't even the only ones making jewelry. We were part of a family of humans, a tangle of branches evolving in parallel, sometimes isolated, sometimes intertwined. Homo sapiens didn't invent humanity. We inherited it. And in some ways, that inheritance may be deeper and richer than we ever imagined. Because modern humans carry traces of those other humans in our DNA. We carry their stories, unwritten, but embedded in our blood. When we marvel at ancient art, when we bury our dead, when we try to make sense of the cosmos, we may be echoing habits that began long before we were here. We're not the climax of a heroic saga. We're just the ones still around to tell the story. It's not about smarts, it's about numbers. So if Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, Denisovans, even Homo erectus were all capable of symbolic thought, why didn't we see culture take off right away? Why the long silence? Why didn't humanity light up the archaeological record with cave art, instruments, and story-rich burials 150,000 years ago? The answer might not be about intelligence at all. It might be about math, specifically population size and connectivity. See, even if an individual or even a small group figures out something ingenious, that knowledge only survives if it gets passed on. And to pass it on, you need a community. You need people. You need enough humans close enough, living long enough, and talking often enough for ideas to be remembered and shared. If a clever hunter in a group of 30 invents a new type of spear, but dies before teaching it to anyone else, that knowledge dies with him, no matter how groundbreaking it was. No legacy. No innovation curve. Just a dead idea. This is what scientists call cultural drift, the loss of information over time, especially in small, isolated populations. It's the same reason languages fragment, traditions fade, and oral histories vanish when communities shrink. Now zoom out. For most of early Homo sapiens history, global population numbers were tiny. We're talking about a few thousand people scattered across entire continents. According to genetic bottleneck studies, the total number of breeding individuals during some periods may have dipped as low as 1,000 to 10,000 worldwide. That's fewer people than the average convention center crowd. That's smaller than most MMORPG servers. And when numbers are that low, culture struggles to scale. But then, something shifts. By about 60,000 to 50,000 years ago, populations started to grow. Climate stabilizes in some regions. Migration accelerates. Homo sapiens start clustering along coasts, rivers, and resource-rich areas, places where life is easier and groups can stay together longer. And with more people comes more exchange. Stories, skills, songs, tools, beliefs. Ideas don't just survive, they start to snowball. This is what researchers like Powell, Shannon, and Thomas argued in a 2009 paper on the role of demography in human innovation. The evolution tree, not ladder. Absolutely. Here's an expanded version of the evolution tree, not ladder, keeping in mind everything that's come before, gradual cognitive buildup, the role of demography, and other intelligent hominins, and everything still to come, the humility and continuity of human evolution. Tone stays thoughtful and grounded, with just a dash of humor to keep things friendly and relatable. The evolution tree, not ladder. For a long time, people imagined human evolution as a ladder. You've probably seen the image 100 times. that lineup of figures moving from stooped ape to proud modern man, each one a little taller and smarter than the last. The classic march of progress. It's clean, simple, easy to remember, and completely wrong. Evolution doesn't work like that. It's not a ladder with Homo sapiens waiting patiently at the top. It's a branching tree, full of twists, forks, and evolutionary experiments, many of which ended up as sad dead ends. Imagine a tech tree from a strategy game or a skill tree in an RPG. There's not one straight path to final form. There are side branches, plenty of builds available, overlapping abilities. Some species developed great tools but didn't expand far. Others spread wide but vanished in the long run. Sometimes the game is just too hard for the build you chose. You then need to pivot. Most species aren't really able to do that so swiftly, including us. We're just the branch that didn't snap. Take Neanderthals, for example. They weren't some failed prototype. They were perfectly adapted to Ice Age Europe, stocky, strong, resilient. They hunted big game, survived harsh winters, and as we've seen, may have had complex culture and symbolic rituals. If the climate had stayed the same, or if Homo sapiens had never migrated into their territory, Neanderthals might still be here. We could be sharing cafes in Berlin with them today. Or consider Denisovans. We've never even found a full skeleton, but we know from DNA that they were genetically distinct, interbred with us, and passed on traits that helped some modern populations thrive at high altitudes. If you're from Tibetan or Melanesian ancestry, you've got some Denisovan upgrades built in. Think of it as ancient DLC content. And Homo naledi, discovered in 2013 in South Africa's Rising Star cave system, this species had a weird mix of traits. Small brains, curved fingers for climbing, but surprisingly complex behavior. They may have been burying their dead in deliberate chamber deposits over 200,000 years ago, with brains the size of oranges. Not bad, considering they missed out on modern neuroscience. Then there's Homo floresiensis, aka the Hobbit. About 3 feet tall, lived on the Indonesian island of Flores, possibly as recently as 50,000 years ago. Small-bodied, small-brained, but likely making stone tools and hunting animals in a complex island ecosystem. All of these species lived at the same time as early Homo sapiens. And for thousands of years, we all coexisted, sometimes peacefully, sometimes not. Sometimes we even interbred. Which means the story of our evolution isn't just about competition. It's also about collaboration, blending, and memory. Our DNA is proof. If you're of European, Asian, or indigenous American descent, you've got 1 to 4% Neanderthal DNA in your genome. If you're from Oceania, that could include another 5% Denisovan DNA. That's not trivia. That's ancestry. That's you. You carry their legacy, literally, in your cells. So no, Homo sapiens didn't replace other humans because we were smarter, better, or more evolved. We were just more numerous, more connected, and, frankly, luckier. A volcanic eruption at the wrong time could have wiped us out. A drought, a virus, an ice age even a little bit colder. In fact, we nearly were wiped out. Probably more than once. Genetic evidence points to a bottleneck around 70 to 80,000 years ago, possibly linked to the Toba supervolcano eruption. At one point, our global population may have dipped below 10,000 individuals. We weren't inevitable. We weren't destined. We're just the ones who made it through thanks to adaptability, endurance, intelligence, and let's not lie to ourselves, a great deal of luck. So when we talk about human evolution, we're not talking about a royal bloodline or a chosen path. We're talking about a complex branching saga, one with characters we're only just beginning to understand. Homo sapiens didn't invent humanity. We inherited it from a family tree full of explorers, innovators, survivors, and we're still evolving. So what really happened? We've been asking this question since the beginning. What changed? What happened around 50,000 years ago that turned ordinary humans into cave painters, jewelry makers, myth builders, explorers? Was it a genetic mutation? A language gene, unlocking suddenly like a cheat code? Did someone wake up one day and invent symbolic thought from scratch? Now, after decades of research and a flood of new evidence, we can say this. Probably not. There was no single eureka moment. No one gene, no one invention, no one shaman in a cave sparking a revolution overnight. What really happened was time. And connection and scale. Homo sapiens had the capacity for culture, maybe even for hundreds of thousands of years. We had the brain power. We had the curiosity. The sparks of symbolic thought were already flickering at Blombos, at Border Cave, in Java, in Brunico. But for culture to survive, to evolve, to snowball into something more, it needed people. Lots of people, and enough stability between them to remember what they knew. That's what changed. Around 60 to 50,000 years ago, conditions lined up. Populations grew. Climate settled in some regions. Groups began to connect through migration, marriage, trade, and memory. Ideas that once vanished with their inventors began to spread, adapt, and survive. And that's when culture took off. Not because the lights suddenly came on in our brains, but because enough people were finally in the room to keep them burning. It's not a story of a spark. It's a story of kindling, slowly gathering until the fire finally caught. And once it did, it changed everything. Humans painted dreams onto cave walls, buried their dead with care and meaning, crossed seas they couldn't see across, imagined spirits, stories, ancestors, futures, told tales so powerful that they lasted thousands of years. We became, in the truest sense, human, not just because we could think, but because we could share. And here's the humbling part. That moment didn't make us special forever. Because we weren't the first to wonder, we likely weren't the first to paint, and we might not be the last. So maybe the real question isn't what happened. Maybe it's, what are we still becoming? Absolutely, if this journey through deep time sparked something in you. A question, a curiosity, maybe even a sense of wonder. Don't let it end here. Subscribe to the channel for more stories from the edge of extinction and the roots of who we are. Like the video if it helped reframe how you see our species. Share it with someone who's ever looked at the stars and wondered where it all began. And drop a comment. What part of this story stuck with you the most? This channel grows with your support, your thoughts, your clicks, your curiosity. They help these stories echo further. Thanks for being part of that. Till next video, keep listening to the echoes.